Dietary fat definitely increases your LDL. No argument. It's true.
It's actually not true. Absolutely nailed it. Absolutely spot on.
Am I debunking? Yes? No?
No. So this logic is basically wrong. It's a little embarrassing if I'm being honest. Got a lot of requests from you guys to take a look at Dr. Robert Lustig from UCSF and his views. So as usual, we reached out, we invited him on multiple times actually over many months. I don't think it's going to happen. It seems at least not anytime soon. So we're going to go over some of his appearances, some of his online content, and his general ideas. He has a talk on YouTube that has 25 million views. Outstanding for scientific content. It's very unusual. It's an older talk from about 10, 15 years ago. So we'll take a look at the main ideas in there, and then we'll look at some newer content as well.
I'm going to tell you tonight a story. By the end of the story, I hope I will have debunked the last 30 years of nutrition information in America.
That's pretty bold. Hopefully you can back that up.
Sure enough, we are all eating more now than we did 20 years ago. Teen boys are eating 275 calories more. American adult males are eating 187 calories more per day. American adult females are eating 335 calories more per day. No question. We're all eating more. Question is, why?
Yeah, and it's probably only gotten worse since he gave this talk. Obviously, calories have increased dramatically over time. On the question of why, there's a lot of interesting work by Kevin Hall and others that's more recent than this talk that he gave. So ultra-processed foods have a lot to do with why we overeat. And there's a lot of research trying to figure out what is it about ultra-processed foods. Is it just the caloric density? Is it other factors that cause us to overeat?
I call this slide very specifically the Coca-Cola conspiracy. This over here, 1915, the first standardized bottle of Coca-Cola out of Atlanta. In 1955, after World War II, and sugar became plentiful again and wasn't being rationed, we have the appearance of the 10-ounce bottle. Then in 1960, the ever ubiquitous 12-ounce can. And of course, today, this over here is the single unit of measure, right? 20 ounces. And then, of course, over here we have the 7-Eleven Big K Thirst Buster, Big Gulp, whatever you want to call it. 44 ounces worth 57 pounds of fat per year. And if that wasn't bad enough, my colleague Dr. Dan Hale at the University of Texas San Antonio tells me that down there they got a Texas-sized Big Gulp. 60 ounces of Coca-Cola, a Snickers bar, and a bag of Doritos, all for 99 cents.
The groans of the audience. Yeah, the amount of ultra-processed foods that we eat nowadays, Western populations and in the U.S. in particular, is crazy. The last stats I saw, over half, most of the calories that people eat in average in the U.S. are from ultra-processed foods. I think it was close to 60%. And it's going up by almost 1% every year. So, yeah, it's crazy.
Each additional sugared sweetened drink increase over a 19-month follow-up period in kids increased their BMI by this much and their odds-risk ratio for obesity by 60%. Okay? That's a prospective study on soft drinks and obesity. The real deal.
Yeah, this has only gotten clearer. We have a lot of recent evidence, recent studies that came out after this talk. The link between soda and weight gain and obesity and other chronic diseases is quite strong.
What if you take the soft drinks away? So this was the fizzy drink study from Christchurch, England, James et al., British Medical Journal, where they went into schools and they took the soda machines out, okay? Just like we did here in California, okay? We haven't seen the data yet, but they went and did it for a year. So the prevalence of obesity in the intervention school stayed absolutely constant, no change, whereas the prevalence of obesity in the control schools, where nothing changed, continued to rise over the year.
Yeah, that's a pretty striking result. Over 1 year, the kids who the soda got removed from their schools, their rate of obesity is flat, didn't go up anymore. And the kids who were still drinking soda, who still had soda available, looks like it went from about 20% to 27% of kids with obesity. In 1 year, that's crazy. 7% of kids became obese over that year. That's really striking.
How about type 2 diabetes? Are soft drinks the cause of type 2 diabetes? Well, This study from JAMA in 2004 looked at the relative risk ratio of all soft drinks, cola, fruit punch, and found a very statistically significant trend of sugared soft drinks, fruit aids, etc., causing type 2 diabetes. And you know we've got just as big a problem with type 2 diabetes as we do with obesity for the same reasons.
Yeah, and it's probably a causal link. I mean, the best predictor of type 2 diabetes is overweight, putting on excess fat mass. As populations become bigger, more obese, we see rate of type 2 diabetes going up. So it's probably not a coincidence. The same foods that are causing people to put on weight raise risk of type 2 diabetes.
So what's in soft drinks? Well, in America, it's this stuff, right? High fructose corn syrup. Everybody's heard of it, right? And currently, we are consuming 63 pounds per person per year. Every one of us. 63 pounds of high fructose corn syrup.
Not every one of us. I don't consume or almost none. So somebody's having my 63 pounds. But yeah, that's pretty crazy. 63 pounds, that's like 30 kilos of high fructose corn syrup a year. Average per person in the US is crazy.
Notice the glucose is a 6-membered ring. The fructose is a 5-membered ring. They are not the same. Believe me, they're not the same. That's what this whole talk is about, is how they're not the same.
Yeah, so I think this is one of his main ideas, that fructose is this especially toxic molecule. It's interesting. We'll see what evidence he's seen for that, or what his specific ideas are, because from what I've seen, the data is pretty mixed, and there's a lot of things where we don't see a ton of difference for human health effects between glucose and fructose.
High fructose corn syrup and sucrose are exactly the same. They're both equally bad. Okay? They're both dangerous. They're both poison.
I also agree. And this is interesting because now we have this controversy with RFK wanting to replace the high fructose corn syrup in Coca-Cola with cane sugar. So it's basically a replacement of high fructose corn syrup with sucrose. And the argument is it's more natural, it's going to be better for you. The exact criticism that most scientists made of that swap was that it was just marketing, that it was kind of a cosmetic change, because it doesn't make a big difference which type of refined sugar you have in Coca-Cola. And it sounds like Lustig completely agrees with that. He's basically saying the same thing, that high fructose corn syrup and sucrose are virtually identical.
In the mid-1970s, we learned that dietary fat raised your LDL. So if dietary fat is A and LDL is B, we learned that A led to B. Okay, dietary fat definitely increases your LDL, no argument. It's true.
It's actually not true. So some fats even lower LDL. Walnuts, avocados, olives, olive oil, those are foods that mainly contain fats that tend to lower LDL. And then things like butter, lard, fatty meats, those tend to raise LDL. So it's less about the amount of fat and more about the type of fats, the quality of the fats.
This was a battle royal back in the 1970s. Okay? This was not a simple thing. There were people lined up on both sides of this story. Okay? So this over here is a book, 1972 it came out, and it was called Pure, White, and Deadly. It's all about sugar. But on the other side, we had this guy over here. Okay? His name was Ancel Keys. Anybody heard of him? He did this study, along with other people around the world, called the 7 Countries Study. Okay? Very famous, front page of Time magazine in 1980.
So he's talking about this debate back in the 60s and 70s over the causes of heart disease. And these two camps, one that argued that sugar, sucrose, purified, refined sugars were a cause or the cause of heart disease. And then the other camp argued that saturated fat was the cause. Of course, we now know from a lot of modern studies that came after that they were both right. Both are risk factors. It's not one or the other.
So this is from Keyes' own work. Partial correlation analysis show that with saturated fat constant, there was no significant correlation between dietary sucrose and the incidence of coronary heart disease. Okay. When you do a multivariate linear regression analysis, you have to do it both ways. You have to do holding fat constant showing that sucrose doesn't work, and then you have to hold sucrose constant and show that fat still works. You see that anywhere? He didn't do it. He didn't do it.
He did do it. Pretty sure they did that. I think Lustig just missed it. So here's the full text. This is the study. This is the paragraph that Lustig is showing on his slide. It's the summary of a chapter. And if we look at that actual chapter where they describe the experiments, it's just a few pages earlier. They say, with saturated fat held constant, the correlation between sucrose and heart disease is not significant. Okay, so this is the analysis Lustig was talking about. And then he's saying they didn't do it the other way around. But it's the very next sentence. On the other hand, with sucrose held constant, the correlation of coronary incidence with calories from saturated fat is R equals 0.62. So this is the exact analysis he's saying you need to do, and they didn't do it. They did it. It's right there. Okay, what do those numbers mean? So this R number is a statistical way of measuring how good a correlation is. So a correlation between two factors. It could be someone's height and someone's weight, or someone's age and someone's height, for example. And you're looking at how well those two correlate in a population. And so if the value is 1, it means it's a perfect correlation. Every time one value goes up, the other goes up. They mirror each other perfectly. If it's 0, it's no correlation. They are like random, right? No relationship. And so for sucrose and heart disease, it was 0.13. So that's a weak correlation. And in fact, they say it's not significant. And then for saturated fat and heart disease, it was 0.62. So that's a moderate correlation. Strong is usually above 0.7. So moderate correlation. Now, this doesn't prove cause and effect because of the type of study, right? This is more of a hypothesis generating type of analysis. But yeah, they did the analysis both ways. What he's saying is missing is right there.
Do we believe this study? Because we based 30 years of nutrition education and information and policy in this country on this study.
Not really, right? This is kind of a meme on the internet that everything we know in nutrition is based on the 7-country study. And if we can show that it's a fraud, that it's bunk, then we can abandon everything and we can say we know nothing about nutrition. That's not true. The 7-country study is what we call hypothesis generating. So it comes up with these possibilities based on the data that then need to be tested in more rigorous studies of other kinds. And then they adjust for a bunch of other things. And then we have randomized trials. And in general, you put all of this together, it consistently points to specific types of saturated fat and specific types of foods, butter, fatty meats, lard, raising risk of heart disease when consumed in substantial amounts, and refined carbohydrates also. And interestingly, the magnitude of the risk for these two things seems to be about similar, calorie for calorie. If you replace the saturated fat in people's diet with refined carbohydrate, calorie for calorie, the risk of heart disease stays high. But if you replace either one with healthier fats, so unsaturated fats, olive oil, avocados, things like that, then the risk comes down. And if you replace them with quality carbohydrates, so unrefined, whole carbohydrates, things like vegetables or whole grains, the risk also comes down. So it's not saturated fat or sugar. This whole debate is misguided. It's both. This is like arguing if diabetes or high blood pressure, which one is bad for heart disease? It's both.
And as far as I'm concerned, it has a hole as big as the one in the USS Cole. All right? You got it? Everybody, am I debunking? Yes? No?
No. You're criticizing a study that you're not really familiar with. You're saying they're missing a key analysis, and that puts a huge hole in the study. And it's in the very chapter that you're looking at. That's not debunking. That's the opposite of debunking. It's a little embarrassing if I'm being honest. And it's good in science to disagree and to challenge things. That's what science is all about. That's the beautiful thing about science. You can disagree with anyone. I just criticized the 7-country study. I said it's not very strong evidence. But first, we learn what's been done, and then we form an opinion, right? If we're just broadcasting random stuff to millions of people, and we're not even bothering to take a decent look at the study to see what they actually did, what are we doing? This is the type of thing where if we're face to face, this is 30 seconds. He brings up this point, they didn't do the analysis. I pull up the study, I show him the sentence, and we move on. And this doesn't take any scientific training. That's the crazy thing. I mean, 25 million people have seen this talk. It didn't take me 5 minutes to look this up. It's really not that hard to fact check these types of claims. It's just that we don't have the habit. I think most people watch something like this and either accept everything that's being said or reject based on their personal preference. That's understandable, but that's not how science works. And creating this habit of just hearing something, not immediately saying yes or no, but going and checking the source, sometimes it's literally 5 minutes and you learn a lot.
So everybody knows that LDL correlates with cardiovascular disease, and that's true, and I'm not going to argue that, that is true, but it's not this one, pattern A LDL. These guys are so light, they are buoyant, they float. So they get carried through the bloodstream, and they don't even have a chance because they're so big and they're so buoyant, they don't even get underneath the edge of the endothelial cells in the vasculature to start the plaque formation process.
Yeah, so we now understand this isn't true. Probably wasn't as well understood when he gave this talk. But this idea that the large LDL are not problematic because they're too large to get into the artery wall doesn't pan out. So, in fact, much larger particles than any LDL size can get in. They're particles called VLDLs, very low density lipoprotein, and VLDL remnants that are much larger than any LDL size. And they definitely cause heart disease, and they definitely get into the artery wall. So this idea that the large LDLs are too large is not true. It's really interesting to look at an older talk and see what ideas stood the test of time and which ones didn't. And this is normal. We have these different theories and these different hypotheses. And with more evidence, things evolve, our knowledge evolves, and we figure out more. That's normal.
So when you get an LDL, you're getting both LDLs, the neutral one and the bad one.
Yeah, so this is probably wrong as well. This idea that the LDL sizes, the small LDLs are really nasty, but the large LDLs are neutral, as he said. This has essentially been abandoned in cardiovascular research. We've had a lot of guests in this field, and generally now, most people in this field hold that it doesn't make a big difference, the size of the LDL for risk. And then there's a subset of researchers, Dr. Ron Krauss being the most famous one, that do believe that there's a difference, that the small LDLs are nastier. But everybody agrees that the large LDLs are not harmless, that they can still cause problems if they're too high. So this idea of the neutrality versus the harm has essentially been abandoned. And this is because studies don't back it up. So genetic studies don't back it up. Studies in populations that have high LDL but are not obese, are not diabetic, are not insulin resistant. So most of their LDLs should be of this large, buoyant kind. We still see plaque and we still see heart attacks in those populations compared to when they have normal LDL levels. So this idea of the large LDLs being neutral, being harmless, is almost certainly wrong.
Okay? And you'll notice that the triglycerides are low and your HDL is high. That's what you want. You want a low triglyceride, high HDL, because that's the good cholesterol. You want high good cholesterol.
Yeah, we now know that HDL is not good cholesterol. It's not protective. There's an association. High HDL correlates with leanness in populations, correlates with more exercise, but it's not reliable because it also tracks a million other things. And so the whole field essentially moved away from looking at HDL as this major metric of risk. And actually it's moving away from lipid metrics in general and towards lipoprotein metrics like ApoB and things like that as more reliable reflections of risk.
What did we do in 1982? What did we do? We went on a high carb diet, which was supposed to be a low fat diet, right? Right. So here's the low fat craze, okay? Took America and the world by storm because the content of low-fat, home-cooked food that you cook by yourself in your house, you can control the content of fat. Okay? But when you process it, low-fat processed food, it tastes like cardboard. It tastes like crap. Okay? So the food companies knew that. So what did they do? They had to make it palatable. So how do you make it something palatable that has no fat in it? You add the sugar, right?
Yeah, this is a concern often with the very low-fat diets is people often start eating more refined carbohydrates, probably because eating very low-fat is difficult for most Westerners. And so they veer towards more refined types of carbohydrates. So yeah, that's a concern when people go very low-fat. It's something definitely to watch out for.
Now, why did we remove fiber from our diet? We as human beings walking the earth 50,000 years ago used to consume 100 to 300 grams of fiber per day. We now consume 12. Why? What did we do? We took the fiber out. So why did we take the fiber out? Well, it takes too long to cook, takes too long to eat, and shelf life. Okay? So people ask me, what's the definition of fast food? Fiberless food.
Yeah, the evidence on concerns of low-fiber diets has only mounted. There was already plenty back then, but we have a lot more now. So yeah, I completely agree with this concern. It's a big issue in the Western diet.
Fructose does not suppress the hunger hormone. There's a hormone that comes from your stomach called ghrelin you've heard about already.
That's true. So there is evidence that fructose doesn't have this effect of suppressing ghrelin. And so that would suggest that fructose is less satiating. But there's probably something else going on, because when we look at actual weight gain in human beings given these different carbohydrates, so this meta-analysis looked at about a dozen studies put together, and body weight was not significantly changed when comparing fructose to glucose or sucrose. Overall, they found that chronic consumption of fructose was neither better nor worse than calorie-matched sucrose or glucose. And they looked at a number of things: fasting glucose, fasting insulin, insulin resistance, cholesterol, triglycerides, and they weren't any worse on the fructose. There's also analyses looking at blood pressure, and if anything, the fructose seems a little better for blood pressure, but no big difference. I've seen one or two metrics where fructose seems worse, usually liver insulin resistance. So because of the metabolism in the liver of fructose is different, fructose is probably a little harsher on the liver. So there's one or two metrics where fructose might be worse. In general, for body weight and for most metabolic markers, it seems to be about similar to glucose or sucrose. The reason that matters is because if fructose is the special poison, like he's arguing in this talk, then you could just replace that with glucose and you'd be much better off. But if they're about similar for most metrics, and they're both not great when purified, when refined in large amount, then that doesn't work. That swap doesn't work, and you actually have to find something else, or you just have to reduce both of them.
VLDL, very low density lipoprotein. Now, anybody heard of that before? Is it good or bad? It's bad. That's bad. Okay? VLDL is bad because that's one of the things that causes heart disease.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, right? VLDLs, he's acknowledging here, VLDL can cause heart disease like many other particles, and VLDLs are much larger than any LDL size. So right here in his very same talk, this already contradicts the logic he was suggesting earlier, that the large LDLs are too large to get into the artery wall and cause problems, where the VLDL are much larger. So that doesn't make sense.
So we know that ethanol is not good for you, except, of course, a little bit is good for you, right? So we can talk about that too later if you want. Okay.
So this has changed as well, this idea of the moderation, that drinking a little bit of red wine is good, but not too much. This has changed. It seems to be mainly was probably an artifact in some studies. And now the understanding is that the less alcohol, the better off we are. It's basically a straight line.
We have 4 things we teach the kids to do, and the parents. Get rid of every sugared liquid in the house, bar none. Only water and milk. Okay? There is no such thing as a good sugar beverage, period. Eat your carbohydrate with fiber. Why? Because fiber is good. Fiber is supposed to be an essential nutrient. And we can talk later, if you want, after the cameras turn off, as to why fiber is not an essential nutrient. Because the government doesn't want it to be. Okay? Because then they couldn't sell food abroad. Wait 20 minutes for second portions, okay, to get that satiety signal. And finally, buy your screen time minute for minute with physical activity. That's the hardest one to do. Okay? So if you play for half an hour, you can watch TV for half an hour. You want to watch TV for an hour, play for an hour.
Yeah, this is really good advice in general. Avoid most sugared liquids. yeah, by and large for a Western population, that's going to be soda, so that's going to be a good move. Eat your carbohydrates with fiber, wait for seconds, and get some exercise in there. Phenomenal. I mean, can't really fault any of that.
Eat your carbohydrate with fiber. That's why we say that. That includes sugar. That's why fruit's okay. Because number one, it limits how much fructose you're going to take in. And number two, it gives you an essential nutrient, which you needed in the first place. And you get some micronutrients along with it.
Okay, absolutely nailed it. When someone is telling you about fructose, the number one thing they have to make clear is, are they talking about soda, high fructose corn syrup, purified artificial source of fructose, or are they talking about an apple? This is the distinction between content that is scientific and content that is just kind of guru on the internet saying absolute platinum nonsense. If it has scientific substance, this distinction will be made, and he was just very clear. He said this is why fruit is okay. He's specifically condemning high fructose corn syrup, soda, ultra-processed foods, right? When someone tries to equate this and say fructose has some evidence of a concern, therefore be scared of a banana or an apple or some strawberries, run. That is content with zero scientific substance. And he's calling fiber an essential nutrient, which is an interesting, I've never heard someone suggest that. That's something I would love to hear more about why he says that. In general, fiber is classified as non-essential. So I would love to hear more about that on his views. But yeah, main thing here is that distinction between fructose from whole fruit versus fructose from Coca-Cola.
Okay, there's good carbohydrate and bad carbohydrate. And glucose is good carbohydrate. Glucose is the energy of life. Fructose, okay, is poison.
I know what he's trying to say. I would put this differently. I think it's less about these isolated molecules, the glucose and the fructose. I think it's more about the foods that they come in, because as he explained, fructose is a problem when purified in very high amount. It's not a problem in fruit. And glucose is not universally okay either. If we just replaced the fructose in soda with glucose, the evidence we have is that we wouldn't make it much better. It wouldn't make for a superfood all of a sudden. So I think it's more empowering and more informative for the public to focus less on these isolated molecules and more on the actual foods. If it's soda, whether it's fructose or glucose, probably not going to be great. And if it's a whole food, whether it contains some fructose or some glucose, it's probably much better for you. Okay, let's look at something more recent. The main message of this talk, I agree with 100%. He's basically trying to alert towards concerns of high amounts of high fructose corn syrup, high amounts of soda. Yeah, big problem in our society. Agree 100%. Let's check out something else.
The most important and the most valuable fatty acid is omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3s are heart healthy, they're anti-inflammatory, they are anti-Alzheimer's because they contribute to neuronal structure and function. And it has been shown that when you are omega-3 deficient, you get multiple diseases, including cardiovascular disease and depression.
Yep, basically agree with that. This is why walnuts, flax seeds, fatty fish are recommended, because they contain healthy fats.
So vegans can get one kind of omega-3. There are three. They can get one kind. They can get one called alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA. However, the other two omega-3s, one is called EPA and the third one is called DHA. Those only come from marine life. Algae make the omega-3s, the fish eat the algae, we eat the fish. We are getting our omega-3s third hand. Now, vegans don't eat fish. So I worry about vegans. So they need to supplement. Vegans need to supplement. And the question is, will they supplement? Because fish oil still comes from fish.
Yeah, so vegans can get long-chain omega-3s preformed from algae supplements, algae oil, or they can get them from bivalves like oysters or clams. That's controversial. Some people will say that's allowed in a vegan diet, and some will say it's not because it's an animal, but it's not sentient. Anyway.
Turns out saturated fat is not one saturated fat. There are two. There's even-chain saturated fatty acids, which are what's in red meat. And then there are odd chain saturated fatty acids, which are what's in dairy. So it turns out that dairy saturated fat is actually anti-inflammatory, whereas red meat saturated fat is not. But it's not pro-inflammatory either. In converse to what Ancel Keys told us. So saturated fat, neither good nor bad from that standpoint. And dairy saturated fat, actually good.
Okay, so he's making a good point here that saturated fat is not one thing. Sometimes it's discussed as this block, but it's actually lots of different saturated fatty acids. And there's probably like a dozen or something. He's breaking it down into two categories, the even chain and the odd chain. That's fine. But he said the even chain is what's found in red meat and the odd chain is what's found in dairy. That's not quite true. Dairy has both odd chain and even chain and much more even chain. So the odd chain is a tiny, tiny percentage of the saturated fats found in dairy. So I looked it up. It's about 1 to 3% of the fats in there are of this odd chain type in dairy. And so the even chain are much more prevalent. In milk, it's about 10 times more. And in butter, it's about 40 times more. So it's dozens of times more. So the saturated fats in the dairy are still predominantly of the even chain kind. All of this stuff, in my opinion, is not that helpful for the public because when we talk about these isolated fat types, how does this help people figure out the overall effect of the food, right? They go to the store and they want to know, if I eat butter, if I eat olive oil, if I eat a steak, what's the health effect? And talking about these isolated molecules, it's scientifically interesting and relevant, but as a bottom line for the public, it can be very confusing. And so when it comes to health effects, he's focusing here on inflammation. If you heard, he's specifically talking about the effect on inflammation, which is okay, but foods do a ton of other things. He talked a lot earlier about how this high amount of fructose, this high amount of high fructose corn syrup can cause fatty liver, and that can be an issue, liver metabolism. Well, we have trials replacing that calorie for calorie with saturated fat rich foods like butter or coconut oil, and the fatty liver gets worse. The liver gets even fattier on those saturated fats, like substantially worse, like almost twice as bad. So we have to look at all of these effects, and this is why in general, when it comes to dairy, fermented dairy like yogurt tends to be recommended at the top. Things like milk tend to be more in the middle, more neutral, and then butter tends to be discouraged in high amounts.
Now, omega-6 fatty acids are what are found in seed oils, so soybean oil, etc. They are pro-inflammatory. Okay, omega-6s are the precursors, so like linoleic acid is omega-6. They are the precursors of arachidonic acid, and arachidonic acid is the precursor to all of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, thromboxanes, eicosanoids, leukotrienes, okay, all, things that generate inflammation.
So this logic is basically wrong. I'm surprised to hear this from him. So his reasoning here is linoleic acid, this omega-6 that's abundant in seed oils, can be converted into this other thing called arachidonic acid, and that can then produce pro-inflammatory molecules, so the seed oil should be inflammatory. The problem is arachidonic acid also gives rise to anti-inflammatory molecules, right? The same pathway. So we can't just guess, gut feeling which way it's going to go. We have to actually test. Look at what happens in people who eat seed oils. Does inflammation go up, down, or sideways? Also, they've shown that the levels of arachidonic acid, that conversion, it barely budges, even with massive changes in intake of linoleic acid of like several fold up or down. And so this whole logic is just theory that doesn't pan out in reality when we look at actual scientific data and scientific tests. We have a whole video going over, I think, a dozen or 24 trials, randomized trials in human beings, giving people seed oils and measuring inflammatory markers and seeing what happens. And essentially, most trials showed no effect. A few actually show a reduction of inflammatory markers when they receive the seed oils. That whole literature is summarized here by these authors. So they say concerns have been raised about linoleic acid being harmful because of potential pro-inflammatory effects. This is exactly what Lustig was voicing. However, this speculation is not supported by randomized controlled feeding studies. Linoleic acid was not found to increase inflammatory markers. So we always have to be careful trying to jump from a biochemistry textbook to try to guess what the effect's going to be in a human being eating a food. Very common mistake, and I think regular viewers of this channel at this point can probably see through this.
And the problem is the more omega-6s, the more chronic inflammation.
Actually, speaking of chronic, with longer follow-ups, following people for over longer periods of time, the effect actually becomes stronger in the opposite direction. So in analyses of studies where people were followed for up to decades, linoleic acid intake is associated with lower inflammation. So C-reactive protein, IL-6, IL-1 beta, these are inflammatory markers. You tend to see them lower in people who consume more linoleic acid, more seed oils, long term. So the evidence we have actually points to the opposite of these ideas, right? The longer you follow, the more you look at chronic intake, the more the evidence points to, if anything, an anti-inflammatory effect.
And that's bad for you every which way. And, will ultimately lead to early demise.
We have evidence on that as well. Early demise, mortality, right? And it goes exactly in the opposite direction. Higher linoleic acid intake, either by asking people about their dietary habits or by actually measuring their blood levels, both methods were linked to modestly lower mortality from all causes, so that's total deaths, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. And it was about 11 to 13% reduction in mortality. Some studies have also looked at cooking with these different fats and compared to people who cook with butter, for example, those who cook with corn oil, canola oil, or olive oil, all three had lower total mortality. So we actually see that people who consume the most linoleic acid, the most omega-6s, they have lower mortality. They go on to die later. So that theory that it should lead to early demise, the evidence is actually pointing to the exact opposite, later demise.
Algal oil is DHA, but algal oil is not a source of EPA. You can get your ALA from your vegetables. You can get your DHA from algal oil, but you're still going to be EPA deficient.
Yeah, this depends on the brand. Some brands are definitely low on EPA, but there are some out there that have plenty. So I'm looking this up. Fish oil has about 360 milligrams of EPA for the daily dose, ballpark, right? And so some algae brands are very low. Some I'm seeing 400, even higher than 400 milligrams a day. So that would be higher than what you normally see in fish oil. The one I have sitting around the house has 300 milligrams of EPA for the daily dose of algae oil. So yeah, this is a good tip to bear this in mind because it varies a lot, but you can get around it. Also, there's some decent conversion from DHA to EPA. So it's not as much of an issue as it is going from the small omega-3s, the ALA that comes in walnuts, going from that to the long form, the EPA DHA. That's harder because it requires a large elongation. But DHA is actually a little longer, I think by 2 carbons. So going from DHA to EPA, you actually remove 2 carbons. And the conversion there is much more effective. I think you can get up to 20% or so. So even if you're not getting enormous amounts of EPA, there's some decent retroconversion there that's probably going to top you up. Okay, guys, so overall, his main message, concern of large amounts of ultra-processed foods, junk foods, high fructose corn syrup, absolutely spot on, so important for public health. It's a shame, in my opinion, that he dilutes that main message with some really, truly weird takes here and there. Every 10 minutes or 15 minutes that you listen to him, there will be a bizarre take, trying to debunk a whole study and making such confident, aggressive claims without really going through it, without really familiarizing himself with the study or what they did, is such a fumble, such an amateurish mistake. And it's so unnecessary. It takes away from the credibility and the impact of that whole talk. Like, I don't know why he included that in there. And then these takes on the fats, some are spot on, some are so superficial. Some of these things are like 5 minutes on the databases to figure it out. So there's a bit of a pattern here of making these absolutely confident, rock-solid claims, sometimes with very superficial understanding without bothering to look things up. And I wish he wouldn't do that. I wish he would resist the urge to do that and focus on his main message, because it's so crucial. Here's another one of my recent fact checks where I look at the glucose goddess. So take a look at that, and I'll see you in there.